In a world where fate can change in the blink of an eye, a beautiful and intelligent maid, Gianna, spends her days working in silence, unnoticed by those around her. Little do they know, her sharp mind and strategic thinking are about to alter the course of a high-stakes business deal. Ian Fitzgerald, a powerful CEO, finds himself cornered in a critical game of chess with an important business partner. But it's the quiet maid who, in a moment of chance, points out the winning move. What begins as a simple game of strategy soon becomes a challenge that sets the stage for a partnership, a friendship, and something much more. But who exactly is Gianna, and what does she want? And what will Ian do when he uncovers the truth about her? As their worlds collide, they must navigate the complexities of business, love, and ambition. So, before we dive in, grab a blanket, dim the lights, and let's get lost in a story of unexpected twists and turns. And hey, don't forget to rate this journey from 0 to 10. What will you think of Gianna's choices by the end? Stay tuned. It's a ride you won't want to miss. The grand mansion sat on a hill overlooking the city, its marble floors gleaming under the soft glow of chandeliers, its walls adorned with artwork worth millions. But inside, where the scent of freshly polished furniture mixed with the faint hint of lemon, Gianna moved quietly, unnoticed by the world around her. At 24, she was strikingly beautiful, with dark, cascading hair that she always kept tightly tied in a neat bun, and eyes that reflected a sharp intelligence most people fail to see. The weight of her circumstances, however, kept her humble. Her family's fragile financial situation had forced her to leave school and take up work as a maid. But in those quiet moments when no one was looking, Gianna would slip away into the library, reading books on history, literature, and even business, teaching herself everything she could. She knew that one day her beauty would fade, but her mind could take her places beyond the reach of her current reality. Each morning, she arrived before the sun, preparing breakfast for Ian Fitzgerald, the CEO of the household. Ian was a man of sharp suits, ice-cold charisma, and a mind that worked at lightning speed. He was as ruthless in the boardroom as he was indifferent to the world outside his business empire. But Gianna, in her quiet way, understood something about him that most people didn't. She saw through the polished exterior to the man who, despite his success, seemed trapped in his own world, never allowing himself to breathe beyond the walls of his power. She had noticed him, of course, not just because of his high profile, but because of the way he could command a room with just a look, or how his expression would harden when things didn't go according to his plans. She saw the strain in his eyes, the slight weariness behind the perfect facade. Yet, Gianna never gave him more than a polite nod as she served his meals. It was safer that way. The mornings blurred together in a predictable rhythm. Gianna would tidy the rooms, dust the shelves, and serve meals with a smile that hid her true thoughts. She wasn't just a maid. She was a spectator to a life she couldn't touch, no matter how much she longed to be a part of it. Still, she didn't complain. She kept to her role, quietly observing the powerful world around her, while keeping her dreams tucked away in the corners of her heart. But there was one moment, just one, when Gianna's life would take an unexpected turn. One afternoon, Ian invited a major business partner to the house to discuss a deal that could change everything for his company. The tension in the air was thick as Ian and his partner, a man from a global investment firm, played a game of chess to pass the time before their meeting. Gianna had entered the room with a tray of tea, setting it on the table beside Ian without saying a word, her presence barely acknowledged by the two men who were engrossed in their game. The partner was a seasoned chess player, known for his strategic mind, and Ian was struggling to keep up. Gianna could sense the mounting frustration in Ian, his brows furrowing deeper with each move, as his partner smirked, confident in his imminent victory. It was then that Gianna, who had spent many quiet evenings reading strategy books and learning the game from a corner of the room, saw something. A single, small move that could change everything. Without thinking, she whispered softly, "If you move your knight to b5, he'll be trapped." Her words were almost an afterthought, a passing comment she didn't expect to be heard, but Ian froze. The room fell silent. The partner glanced up, his eyebrows raised in surprise. Ian, still sitting across the board, turned his gaze toward Gianna, his eyes narrowing, a mix of curiosity and disbelief flashing across his face. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice cold but not unkind. Gianna's heart skipped a beat. "Move your knight to b5, she repeated, a little more confidently this time. "Your opponent will be forced to move his queen, giving you a clear path to win." The partner, who had been watching the exchange with growing amusement, let out a short, almost mocking laugh. "Are you seriously taking advice from the maid?" he sneered. "Let's see if she can back up her words." The challenge hung in the air like an unspoken dare. Ian hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking from Gianna to the chessboard. Then, with a sharp movement, he followed her suggestion. His knight moved to b5, and within moments, the game was turned in his favor. The partner's confident smile vanished as he realized he had been outmaneuvered. Gianna watched in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected this outcome, but there it was. Ian Fitzgerald, the powerful CEO, had just won, thanks to her. The partner sat back, stunned, his face flushed with humiliation. I don't believe it," he muttered, eyeing Ian with a mix of disbelief and respect. Ian, however, said nothing, simply pushing the chessboard aside and turning to Gianna. "That was impressive," he said coolly. "You know your way around a chessboard. Maybe you're more than just a maid after all." But the challenge didn't end there. The partner, still reeling from his defeat, turned to Gianna with a smirk. "If you're so good, how about you sit down and play me yourself? I'd like to see if you're really as clever as you think you are." Ian's gaze flicked to her, his interest piqued. Gianna swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had never played against anyone with such high stakes, but there was something inside her that urged her to prove herself, to take this chance. Slowly, she sat down across from the partner. The game that followed was one for the books. In a mere 15 minutes, Gianna outplayed him, trapping him in a brilliant move that left him speechless. When it was over, the partner sat back in his chair, his face pale. "You've got skills, I'll give you that," he said grudgingly, before standing up to leave. The room was still, and for the first time, Gianna felt the weight of Ian's gaze upon her, not with disdain, but with curiosity. "Who are you, really?" he asked, his voice low. Gianna met his eyes, a sense of pride swelling inside her. "I'm just someone who sees things clearly," she replied, her voice steady. "Maybe more than you think." As the evening wore on and the business deal was finalized, Gianna's life had changed forever. No longer just the silent maid, she had proven herself in a way she never expected. The boundaries between her and Ian Fitzgerald's world were beginning to blur, and she had no idea what the future would hold. But one thing was certain: this was only the beginning. The evening sun filtered through the tall windows of the grand mansion, casting a warm golden glow across the room. Ian Fitzgerald stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the horizon, but his mind was far from the peaceful sight. Today was no ordinary day. It was the culmination of months of tense negotiations, a business deal that could either elevate his empire to new heights or bring it crashing down. The stakes were as high as they could get. And yet, in his private study, the game of chess seemed to be the only thing that mattered. His opponent, Thomas Randall, a seasoned investor with a sharp mind for numbers, was poised to become his largest partner, if Ian could secure the deal. But right now, It was the chessboard that was weighing heavily on his thoughts, not the business discussions. Gianna had been in the room earlier, preparing tea and snacks, making herself almost invisible as she moved between the two men. But Ian's focus was intense, and he barely noticed her presence until she stepped forward, the soft clinking of the teacups breaking through the silence. She placed the tray down, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. He saw that same glimmer in her eyes, something beyond the duties of a maid, something sharper, more perceptive. He returned to the game, his fingers hovering over his next move, but the pressure was mounting. Every piece on the board felt like an extension of the deal he was about to finalize. One wrong move, and everything would be lost. "Your move," Thomas said, a faint smile playing on his lips as he watched Ian. It was clear he was enjoying the game, savoring every second of Ian's discomfort. Ian had been playing defensively for the last few turns, trying to manage the overwhelming pressure of both the game and the deal. He could feel the sweat beginning to form on the back of his neck. His opponent had him in a corner, with only a few options left, none of which seemed promising. He glanced at the chessboard, his mind racing to find a way out. The pieces seemed to mock him, offering no clear path to victory. For a moment, Ian's mind flickered back to the earlier conversation about the business deal. Thomas had already expressed some hesitancy, the kind of hesitation that could easily lead to a deadlock. The pressure from both his business and personal life was becoming unbearable. A sudden crack in his otherwise composed exterior made itself known when he muttered under his breath, "How did I end up here?" The words were barely audible, but Gianna, who had been tidying up nearby, caught them. She paused, her gaze lingering on Ian for a moment longer than she intended. Ian, lost in thought, failed to notice. His hand moved to take his next piece, but as his fingers brushed against the chessboard, something caught his eye. A fleeting glance at Gianna revealed something unexpected, a look of focus on her face. She wasn't just serving tea or cleaning the room. She was watching the game, really watching it. Her eyes traced the positions of the pieces, studying the board with the same intensity Ian would use when analyzing a business contract. "Are you just going to stare at the board, or will you make your move?" Thomas taunted, breaking Ian's concentration. Ian's hand hesitated over the night, but a part of him felt the weight of time ticking by. The room had grown unbearably quiet, the hum of the clock on the wall louder than usual. He had to make a choice, and fast. That was when he heard it. "If you move your knight to b5, you can trap him." Gianna's voice broke through the silence. It was calm, measured, but it caught Ian off guard. She had spoken once before, and he had brushed it off, but now her voice held a clarity that demanded attention. Ian blinked, surprised, and turned his head toward her. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low, almost questioning whether she was serious. Gianna, unfazed, walked closer to the chessboard, her eyes never leaving the pieces. "If you move your knight to b5, he'll be forced to move his queen, opening up a chance to gain the advantage. It's a clean trap." Ian stared at her, confused at first. How could she, a mere maid, have such an acute understanding of the game? Her suggestion wasn't just a guess. It was strategic brilliance. Thomas let out a laugh, clearly amused. "Are you taking advice from the maid now? What does she know about chess?" His words were dismissive, but Gianna, undeterred, continued to stand by Ian's side. Ian's eyes flicked between the board and her, something clicking into place. He had no more time to waste. With a swift motion, Ian moved his knight to b5. He could almost feel the tension rise in the room as Thomas's confident smile faltered. The partner leaned forward, studying the board with increasing uncertainty. He was starting to see what Ian had just realized. The game had shifted. The queen was now in a vulnerable position, and Ian had an opening. For a few tense moments, Thomas didn't make a move. He stared at the board, seemingly trying to find a way out. But the more he analyzed, the more he realized that Ian had caught him in a trap. With a frustrated sigh, Thomas made a half-hearted move, but it was clear the game was already over. Ian had won. Thomas sat back in his chair, visibly shaken. "I don't believe it," he muttered, as if the loss had rattled him more than just the game itself. Ian, now with a calm but determined expression, slowly turned toward Gianna. "That was impressive," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. "You've got more than just cleaning skills, don't you?" Gianna nodded, her gaze steady, but there was no pride in her eyes, only a quiet satisfaction. "It's just a game," she replied simply. "But it's about seeing what others don't." Thomas stood, still not fully comprehending how he had lost, his pride bruised. "You're good," he said to Gianna, grudgingly, as if conceding defeat wasn't just about the game. "But I still don't see how that's relevant to business." Ian remained silent for a moment before answering, his voice more contemplative than usual. "Maybe it's not just about business," he said. "Maybe it's about seeing things differently." Thomas left soon after, his defeat still fresh in his mind, and the business deal, once teetering on the edge of failure, was secured. As the door closed behind him, Ian turned to Gianna, a newfound respect in his eyes. The maid, the one who had been nothing more than a fleeting presence in his life, had just changed the course of everything. He had to know more about her, the quiet woman who had seen what others could not. As the last light of the evening dimmed, Ian looked at the chessboard, the game now forgotten, and realized that Gianna had not just won the game, she had won his attention. The evening air felt heavier than usual as Ian stood by the window, looking out over the sprawling city lights. The business deal with Thomas Randall had been secured, and yet, despite the success, his mind lingered on something else: the unexpected intervention of Gianna. Her insight during the chess game had left a mark on him, something he couldn't shake off. It wasn't just that she had won him the game. It was the way she had observed, the way she had seen the subtle shifts in the dynamics when no one else had noticed. The thought gnawed at him, and for the first time in years, Ian felt a need for something, someone that wasn't driven by numbers or profit. Gianna was in the kitchen when Ian walked past, the soft sounds of clinking dishes the only noise in the quiet house. She was moving quickly, methodically, her usual poise in every action. For a moment, Ian stood in the doorway, watching her, but when she looked up, her expression was unreadable. There was no pride, no hint of satisfaction from the game earlier, just the same calm efficiency he'd always seen in her. He cleared his throat, stepping into the kitchen. "Gianna," he started, his voice unexpectedly softer than usual. "About the chess game." She cut him off with a quick, polite smile. "It's nothing, sir. Just a game. No need for anything more." Her words were humble, as though the win meant little to her beyond its practical outcome. But Ian was different. To him, it was more than just a game. He could feel the change in the air, a shift that had begun ever since that moment. He wasn't sure what it was, but something inside him had stirred, something he didn't quite understand. "Maybe it's not just a game," Ian said, stepping closer to the counter where she stood. "You've shown me that you see things differently. I'm not just talking about chess. I mean, how you approach everything." Gianna turned her gaze to him, her eyes not showing surprise, but something else. Curiosity, perhaps, but a hint of caution as well. "I'm just doing my job," she said simply, her voice steady. "I'm not looking for anything more." Ian studied her for a moment, sensing that she wasn't as indifferent as she appeared. She had intelligence and drive hidden beneath her modest role. It was clear to him now that Gianna wasn't just a maid. She was someone with untapped potential, someone who could bring something new to the table, something more than he had imagined. "I don't think you're just doing your job," Ian said, his words deliberate. "I think you're capable of more. You have a way of seeing things that others don't, and that's rare. I could use someone like you in my company." Gianna looked up at him, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "You want me to work for you? In the company?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost as if she didn't fully believe what she was hearing. Ian nodded. "Not as a maid, Gianna. I'm offering you a position as an advisor, a strategist, someone who can help me think outside the box. You've already proven you can think like that, and I need people who see beyond the obvious." There was a pause, a silence that hung in the air. Gianna was still processing his words. Her life had been one of quiet observation, never dreaming of something so grand. She had never expected to be offered a seat at the table with people like Ian Fitzgerald, but the truth was, she had always wanted more. She had studied business in her spare time, had read books on strategy and leadership, though she never voiced it to anyone. She didn't want to be seen as anything more than a maid, but the offer before her now was undeniable. I don't know what to say," she whispered, the weight of his offer sinking in. "I have never done anything like that before." Ian's gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. "I know, but that's why I'm offering it to you. I see something in you, Gianna. I see potential. You don't have to know everything right now. We'll figure it out together." She shook her head slightly, almost as if trying to push the idea away, but something inside her, the same part of her that had made the chess move, was starting to awaken. She had always kept to herself, hidden behind the uniform and the role she played. But now, in this moment, she could feel the stirrings of something different. "I can't just leave my duties here," she said quietly. But Ian stepped forward, his voice urgent. "You won't be leaving your duties. You'll still have a place here, Gianna. But you won't be invisible anymore. You'll be working with me, helping me shape this company. This is your chance to build something more for yourself." She looked down at her hands, unsure of what to do with the overwhelming thoughts swirling inside her. She had always believed she would stay in the shadows, a silent observer in a world of wealth and power. But now Ian was offering her a way out of that world, into something new. "I'll need some time to think about it," she said, her voice hesitant. But it wasn't a rejection. It was an acknowledgement of the magnitude of the offer. Ian nodded, understanding her hesitation. "Take all the time you need," he said softly, his tone now far more personal. "But know this, Gianna. You're the kind of person I need in my corner." As the evening drew on, Gianna's thoughts remained clouded. She couldn't deny that a part of her wanted to take this step, wanted to prove that she was more than what she appeared to be. But another part of her was terrified of stepping into a world that wasn't hers, of leaving behind the life that had kept her safe, even if it was small and unremarkable. The next morning, she would have to decide whether to stay in her comfortable world of silence or to step forward into something unknown, something that could change the course of her life forever. Ian, on the other hand, sat back in his chair, deep in thought. He knew he had offered her more than just a job. He had offered her an opportunity to change her life. But he also knew that Gianna was no ordinary woman, and the choice she had to make would not be an easy one. Still, something inside him told him that she would take the leap. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary, not just for her, but for both of them. As the sun began to set, casting a shadow over the mansion, Ian allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, he had found a partner in Gianna, someone who could change not just the future of his company, but his own future as well. The decision had been made. The next morning, Gianna walked into Ian's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She had slept little, the weight of her choice pressing on her mind all night. The offer was too good to refuse, yet it felt like stepping into a world that was not hers. She had spent so long in the shadows, but now Ian had given her a chance to stand in the light. She had accepted his offer, though the path ahead felt uncertain. As she stood before Ian, who was already seated at his desk, the air between them was thick with the tension of change. Ian glanced up from the papers in front of him and gave her a nod, his face unreadable but his eyes warm. "Gianna, welcome aboard," he said, his voice steady. She nodded back, not yet trusting her own voice. She had no idea what was to come, but she was determined to find out. The first few days in the office were a whirlwind of unfamiliar faces, high-level meetings, and strategic discussions that she had only read about before. Gianna sat at a small desk in the corner of Ian's office, far from the executive chairs, and observed quietly, taking in everything she could. She began to understand how things worked, how decisions were made, and how every move could either bring success or lead to failure. But despite her sharp instincts and observations, it didn't take long for her to realize that not everyone was as welcoming as Ian had been. There were whispers behind closed doors, glances exchanged when she entered the room, and the subtle but palpable feeling that she was an outsider. In the meetings, the executives barely acknowledged her presence, their eyes lingering on their phones or the documents in front of them, as if she were just another cog in the machine. At first, she tried to speak up, offering ideas or suggestions based on her observations, but they were often dismissed with polite smiles or brief nods. It was clear to Gianna that the world she had entered was not as welcoming as she had hoped. There was a hierarchy here, and she was at the bottom, despite Ian's support. The challenge was not just about fitting in, it was about proving that she belonged. It wasn't long before she was put to the test. Ian had been in talks with a potential new investor, a powerful figure in the tech industry, who had the resources to take the company to the next level. This investor, Thomas Grant, was known for being demanding and skeptical, especially about unconventional ideas. Ian had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, but a day before they were scheduled to meet, something unexpected happened. The lawyer Ian had hired to review the terms of the contract found an alarming discrepancy, a clause buried in the legal language that could potentially cost the company millions if they signed the deal as it was. Ian, frustrated and running out of time, needed a solution fast. And that's when he turned to Gianna. "Gianna, I need you to look at something," Ian said abruptly as she entered his office. "This is the contract for the deal with Thomas Grant. I need you to find out if there's anything hidden in the fine print. We don't have much time." Gianna took the papers from him, her mind already working through the possibilities. She had read legal documents before, but this was different. This was business at the highest level, and the stakes were far greater than anything she had encountered. The tension was palpable and her thoughts raced as she scanned the pages. Minutes passed as she carefully reviewed every clause, her brow furrowing with concentration. Ian paced the room, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. When Gianna finally spoke, her voice was calm, but there was a fire behind it. "There's a clause here," she said, pointing to a section that Ian had overlooked. "It says that if the company fails to meet certain performance metrics within the first year, we'll be forced to take on Thomas Grant's liabilities, including his failing subsidiaries. If we don't back out now, we'll be tied to them for 5 years, no matter what happens." Ian froze, his eyes widening as the gravity of her words sank in. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. Gianna nodded. "I'm sure." The revelation hit Ian like a blow to the chest. He had been so focused on sealing the deal with Thomas Grant that he hadn't even considered the possibility of hidden traps in the contract. But now, thanks to Gianna's sharp eyes, the deal was on the verge of collapse. "We need to call the meeting off," Ian said, his mind racing. If we sign this deal, it could cost the company everything. I won't let that happen." Gianna looked at him, her expression calm but resolute. "We can fix this," she said. "But we need to act fast. We'll need to be prepared to negotiate and push back on these terms. If Thomas Grant is serious about working with us, he'll agree to the changes." Ian stared at her for a moment, taking in the calm confidence in her words. She wasn't just a maid. She was a strategist, a force to be reckoned with. In that moment, Ian realized that he had made the right choice in bringing her into the company. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "We'll do it your way. Let's go back to the table and fight for this." The next day, Ian and Gianna walked into the meeting with Thomas Grant, the weight of the contract and the stakes heavy on their shoulders. Thomas, who had been eagerly anticipating the deal, greeted them with a smile. But as soon as the conversation turned to the details of the contract, his smile faded. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone cold, when Ian presented the issues with the clause. "Are you backing out of the deal?" Gianna stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "We're not backing out," she said, "but we're not going to sign a contract that puts our company at risk. We need to renegotiate the terms or we walk." Thomas's eyes narrowed as he studied her, clearly taken aback by the audacity of her words. He looked to Ian, expecting him to intervene, but Ian stood silently by her side, his support unwavering. The tension in the room was thick, but Gianna didn't flinch. She knew this was the moment that would define her, whether she could hold her ground or crumble under pressure. She spoke confidently, outlining the changes they needed to see in the contract, and in the end, Thomas agreed to the revisions, albeit begrudgingly. The deal was saved, and Ian knew it was because of Gianna's sharp mind and unwavering confidence. As they left the meeting, Ian turned to her, his respect for her growing with every passing moment. "You did it," he said, his voice tinged with admiration. "You saved this company." Gianna nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "It's not over yet," she replied, but in that moment, Ian knew that this was just the beginning. The challenges ahead would be great, but with Gianna by his side, he finally felt like they could conquer anything. Gianna had proven herself, not just as an observer of the world, but as someone who could shape it. And Ian had learned that sometimes, the people you least expect are the ones who can change everything. The days following the successful negotiation with Thomas Grant felt like a turning point for both Gianna and Ian. Gianna had been brought in to save the company from disaster, and she had done so not only with her sharp intellect, but with a level of poise and confidence that Ian hadn't expected. Her presence in the company was no longer questioned. The team had begun to see her for what she was, a strategist, not just a maid. But there was something else, something neither of them had anticipated, growing quietly between them. As the days passed, Gianna found herself in more and more discussions with Ian, not just about business, but about everything. It started with small exchanges, a comment on the weather, a brief conversation about a book she was reading. But soon, their interactions became more frequent and somehow more personal. Ian found himself looking for reasons to speak to her, to spend time with her, and though he didn't fully understand why, he felt a growing sense of admiration for her, not just for her intellect, but for the way she carried herself, steady, unflinching, and never asking for anything in return. Gianna, on the other hand, began to notice the small shifts in their interactions. At first, she dismissed it as nothing, but the truth was hard to ignore. There was an energy between them, a subtle pull, that neither of them could deny. He was a powerful CEO, and she was a woman who had spent most of her life in the shadows. Yet, when their eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding, a shared recognition of something they both longed for: connection. One evening, after a particularly long day, filled with meetings and deadlines, Ian called Gianna into his office. It had been a quiet day. The city outside bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, and Gianna had been working through some strategy reports when she received his call. "Gianna, I need to discuss a few things with you." Ian's voice came through the intercom. His tone was businesslike, but there was something else in it, something that made her stomach flutter. She stood up from her desk, walking toward his office, trying to ignore the feeling creeping up inside her. When she entered, she found him standing by the window, looking out over the city, his figure outlined by the fading light. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, his voice a bit hesitant, "about what you did in that meeting with Thomas Grant. You handled yourself with incredible confidence. And I realized something." Gianna raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "What did you realize?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. Ian hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I realized that you're not just an advisor to me anymore. You've become indispensable. I don't just need you for your skills. I value your perspective, your judgment. You've become someone I trust." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than they should have been. Gianna felt a strange mixture of pride and something else, something unfamiliar stir within her. She had always been self-sufficient, had always relied on her own abilities. But hearing Ian say that, hearing him acknowledge her value, struck her in a way she wasn't prepared for. "I appreciate that," Gianna replied, her voice steady, but her heart was beating faster than usual. "I'm here to help you, Ian. I've always been here to help." She couldn't quite pinpoint why, but the way he looked at her now, with a softness she hadn't seen before, made her pulse race. Ian stepped closer to her, the air between them thick with tension. "You've done more than help," he said, his voice low. "You've changed things for me, more than you know. And for the first time, I find myself wondering how I ever managed without you." Gianna looked up at him, their proximity so close now that she could feel the warmth of his body. Her heart was hammering in her chest, and she had to force herself to keep her composure. He was the CEO of a major company, and she was just the maid who had stepped into a role she had never expected. But there was something undeniable in the way he was looking at her, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "I don't know what to say to that," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Ian smiled, but it wasn't his usual corporate smile. This was softer, more genuine. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "I just wanted you to know." The conversation ended abruptly, but the lingering silence between them was charged, as though everything had changed in those few seconds. Gianna quickly excused herself, her mind spinning. She couldn't process what had just happened. Was it a moment of weakness on Ian's part? Or was there something more to it? She didn't have the answers, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to. Over the next few days, things between them became a bit more complicated. Ian's behavior toward her shifted, though it was subtle. He began to seek her out more, asking for her opinions on matters that had nothing to do with work. He would occasionally drop by her desk, offering small talk or a casual comment about something they had discussed earlier. Gianna, though still unsure about where this was heading, found herself looking forward to these moments, even if she didn't admit it to herself. It was during one of these conversations, as they sat together in the lounge area, discussing a potential new project, that something shifted. They had been talking about strategy and logistics when Ian, amid a sentence, suddenly looked at her with a curious expression. "Gianna," he said, his voice softer than usual. "How do you do it? How do you stay so composed, so sure of yourself even when everyone else doubts you?" Gianna blinked, caught off guard by the question. She hadn't expected it. "I don't know," she replied honestly. I guess I've had to be. I've had to learn how to be self-sufficient. Ian leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. I admire that about you, he said quietly. I think it's what makes you so unique. The word unique lingered in the air, and Gianna felt something stir in her chest. She had spent her life being invisible, hiding behind the roles others had placed on her. But now, Ian was seeing her, not just as an employee, not just as a maid, but as someone who was more. He was seeing her for who she truly was. As their conversation shifted back to business, Gianna couldn't help but notice the subtle but undeniable change in their dynamic. Something had shifted between them, something that neither of them could ignore, no matter how hard they tried. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was about something deeper, something personal. And as Gianna looked into Ian's eyes, she wondered, what would happen if they allowed that something to grow? What would happen if they let the connection between them unfold? But as quickly as the thought crossed her mind, she pushed it away. There was too much at stake. She couldn't afford to get distracted. But as the days passed, the connection between them only deepened. And Gianna realized, whether she wanted to or not, that her feelings for Ian were growing stronger. She just didn't know if he felt the same. The days after their last conversation weighed heavily on Gianna's mind. Ian's words had lingered in her thoughts like a quiet echo, and the way he had looked at her, so differently than before, had unsettled her in ways she couldn't fully grasp. She had always been aware of the boundary between them. He was the CEO, and she was nothing more than an employee, a maid-turned-strategist. But now, she couldn't help but feel that something was shifting between them, something that neither of them had been prepared for. It wasn't just the glances they exchanged during meetings, or the quiet conversations they shared when no one was around. It was the way Ian's presence seemed to pull her in, inescapable and powerful. Gianna tried to keep her focus on the work. She had a reputation to uphold now, after all. She was no longer just the maid. She was a key player in Ian's business, and her mind had to remain sharp. But every time their paths crossed in the hallways or in the office, she felt a strange flutter in her chest. She had tried to ignore it, but it was becoming impossible. There was something about Ian, the way he spoke to her, the way his eyes lingered a moment too long, that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. She was no longer the invisible woman in the background, unnoticed and unheard. She was something more to him, and it terrified her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the office in hues of orange and pink, Gianna sat alone in Ian's office, reviewing a new project proposal. The hum of the city outside seemed distant, but her mind was racing. Ian had left for an urgent meeting, and for the first time in a while, she was left with her thoughts, with the space to truly reflect on everything that had happened. She had always prided herself on being in control of her emotions, of keeping everything tightly packed away. But now, there was this strange feeling growing inside her, a mix of excitement and fear, of longing and doubt. She closed the file in front of her and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. How had she gotten here? Just a few months ago, she had been riding her bike through the rain, delivering food, dreaming of something more but never believing she could have it. Now, she was here, working alongside one of the most powerful men in the city, making decisions that could shape the future of the company. And yet, despite all of her accomplishments, despite everything she had achieved, she couldn't stop thinking about Ian, about the way he looked at her, the way his presence seemed to consume every part of the room when he entered. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Gianna quickly straightened up, smoothing the front of her blouse as Ian walked in, his usual sharp suit replaced with something more casual, though still undeniably stylish. He didn't speak at first, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. The moment his gaze landed on her, Gianna's heart skipped a beat, and she cursed herself for feeling this way. Why did he have this effect on her? Why was it so hard to act normal around him? "I didn't mean to interrupt," Ian said, his voice softer than usual, though still tinged with that quiet authority. "I saw you were still here, and I wanted to make sure you're not overworking yourself. It's been a long day." His words were thoughtful, but his tone held something else, something deeper. Gianna looked up, meeting his eyes. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his concern than just a passing comment. "I'm fine," she replied, forcing a smile. "Just trying to get ahead on the reports. I don't mind working late." Ian took a few steps into the room, his presence undeniable. He stood next to her desk, a slight frown on his face as he glanced down at the papers in front of her. "You're not just working late. You're pushing yourself too hard," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "You don't have to do everything alone, Gianna." Her breath caught in her throat at the simplicity of his words. "I'm used to it," she said, the words coming out almost defensively. But the truth was, she had always been alone in everything she did. She had learned to depend on no one but herself. Ian, however, seemed to understand her better than anyone else had. He didn't press her further, but instead, he took a step back, his gaze not leaving her. For a moment, there was only silence, and it was in that silence that Gianna felt something shift, something undeniable. She wanted to look away, to break the tension, but she couldn't. She couldn't stop herself from holding his gaze, from letting that small flicker of something unspoken, pass between them. "Gianna." Ian's voice was low, almost a whisper. Her name on his lips made her heart race, and she quickly looked down at the desk, trying to regain some semblance of composure. But it was already too late. The feelings she had buried deep inside her were surfacing, rising like an unstoppable tide, and she couldn't stop it. "I don't know what this is, but I can't deny that things have changed between us," Ian continued, his words heavy with meaning. Gianna opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She wanted to tell him that it was nothing, that she was imagining things, that nothing could come of this, whatever this was. But the truth was, she didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. "I know," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I feel it too." The moment the words left her lips, she felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted. There was no turning back now. Ian didn't move, didn't say anything at first, but then, slowly, he reached forward, his fingers grazing hers lightly. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like everything in that moment. Gianna's breath hitched, and she looked up at him, meeting his eyes once more. The tension between them was palpable, thick in the air, and for the first time, Gianna allowed herself to acknowledge what had been building between them. The unspoken attraction, the undeniable connection. "I don't want to complicate things, but I also don't want to ignore what's happening between us," Ian said, his voice steady, but with a raw honesty that caught Gianna off guard. Gianna swallowed hard, her emotions swirling inside her like a storm. She knew what he meant, and she knew that this moment would change everything. She had tried to keep her distance, to maintain control, but now it was slipping away. She nodded, her voice shaky but determined. "I don't know what to do with this either," she admitted, her eyes searching his for something she couldn't explain. "But I don't want to ignore it either." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the air heavy with everything they couldn't say. Then, Ian took a step closer, his hand brushing hers again, and in that small touch, Gianna felt everything shift once more. She had no idea where this would lead, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. The days that followed were a blur for Gianna. The moment she had admitted to herself that something had shifted between her and Ian, everything changed. What had once been a professional dynamic, clear and defined, was now complicated, filled with unspoken emotions that neither of them fully understood. Yet, despite the growing tension between them, they both continued to work side by side, though the atmosphere in the office had shifted. There was a subtle, undeniable charge that hung in the air, and it wasn't just the work that occupied their thoughts anymore. Ian had been careful to maintain his distance, though his eyes would often linger a moment longer than necessary, his words a bit more personal than before. Gianna, too, found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. But neither of them spoke of it, as though acknowledging it aloud would make it too real, too dangerous. One evening, Ian called her into his office to discuss a new project, one that would require all of their expertise, but also one that felt more significant than any project they had tackled before. As Gianna walked into the room, she felt a familiar knot in her stomach. Ian stood by the window, his back to her, looking out over the city. The light from his desk lamp cast long shadows on the floor, and the entire room seemed quieter than usual. When he turned to face her, she saw the same intensity in his eyes. But now there was something else there too, an unspoken understanding. He gestured for her to sit, and once she did, he walked over to the desk and laid out a set of files in front of her. "I've been thinking about how much the company has changed since you came on board," Ian said, his voice steady, but with an edge of something deeper. "You've brought a perspective I didn't even know we were missing. You've made us more agile, more adaptable, and now I want us to do something different. Something big." Gianna raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. Ian paused for a moment, as if considering how best to explain. "I want to expand the company into international markets. Specifically, we're looking at Asia, China, Japan, South Korea. We've had some preliminary talks with partners there, but we need a strategy that connects with their markets on a deeper level. A strategy that understands their culture, their business practices, and their very essence. And that's where you come in." Gianna blinked, surprised by his words. "Me? I'm not an expert in international business, Ian. I'm just—" "No," Ian interrupted, his voice soft but insistent. "You're not just anything, Gianna. You've spent years studying different cultures, different languages. You understand the subtlety of human interactions, the way people think, the way they approach business, life, and everything in between. You've already proven that you can see things others can't." His words hit her harder than she expected, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had always kept her dreams and aspirations close to her chest, buried behind the mundane realities of her day-to-day life. But here, in front of Ian, in this moment, she could feel her potential stirring, like an ember waiting to catch fire. "I want you to lead the team on this," Ian continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "You'll work closely with me, of course, but I need you to take charge. This could be the start of something huge for both of us, Gianna. A new chapter for the company, and for us." The weight of his words settled in her chest, and she could feel the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about a business opportunity. It was about her place in this world, in his world. Ian had just given her more than a job. He had given her a chance to step into something bigger, something she had always dreamed of but never thought was possible. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ian smiled, a small but genuine smile that made her heart race. "You're more than ready, Gianna. You've already proven that. Now it's time to take the next step. I believe in you." His words hung in the air, and for the first time since she had stepped into his office, Gianna felt a sense of clarity. She had always been afraid of stepping outside her comfort zone, of taking risks that could change everything. But now, with Ian's trust in her, she felt a surge of confidence she hadn't known she possessed. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do it. I'll lead the team." Ian's smile widened, and for the first time, Gianna felt a deep sense of pride in herself, a recognition of her strength and abilities. She wasn't just the maid who had found herself in the right place at the right time. She was a partner now, someone who could shape the future of this company, and her future as well. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and research as Gianna dove headfirst into the new project. Ian was right there beside her, offering guidance but giving her the space to take charge. She found herself working late into the evenings, poring over documents, making phone calls, and collaborating with experts on international markets. With every passing day, she felt herself growing more and more confident, her mind expanding with new ideas, new ways of thinking. Ian had given her the tools she needed to succeed, but more than that, he had given her something she hadn't realized she'd been missing: belief in herself. But as much as Gianna threw herself into the work, she couldn't ignore the growing tension between her and Ian. The quiet moments they shared, the subtle glances and unspoken words, were becoming harder to ignore. She found herself wondering if Ian felt the same way she did. The line between professional and personal was starting to blur, and she wasn't sure how long they could keep pretending it didn't matter. One evening, as they wrapped up a long meeting and the office grew quiet, Ian looked at her from across the table. "Gianna," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "I've been thinking about us, about everything." Her heart skipped a beat, and she met his gaze, unsure of what was coming next. "I don't want to complicate things, but I think we both know that something's changed between us, and I can't ignore it anymore." Gianna's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The moment that would change everything. "I feel it too," she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Ian stood up and walked over to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't want to just be your boss, Gianna. I want to be something more. But I won't push you into anything. I just needed you to know how I feel." And in that moment, standing there in the quiet of the office, Gianna knew that everything had changed. They had crossed a line, and neither of them could go back. But it wasn't just about the feelings that had been building between them. It was about the future they could build together, both personally and professionally. The partnership they had started was just the beginning, and as Gianna looked into Ian's eyes, she knew that they were both ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, the air in the office had changed. The tension between Ian and Gianna was palpable. But now, it was no longer the kind of tension that made everything feel uncertain. It was the kind of tension that came with the realization that they were finally acknowledging the connection that had been growing between them for months. After Ian had confessed his feelings, Gianna found herself caught between excitement and fear. She had always been someone who prided herself on being self-sufficient, never relying on anyone. But in that moment, when Ian had spoken the truth that she had kept hidden from herself, everything shifted. It was as if the walls she had built around her heart were suddenly crumbling, revealing something raw, something real. But now, with the weight of their feelings out in the open, they had to navigate the complexities of their relationship, both in the office and beyond. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Gianna poured herself into the international project, and Ian was right there beside her, offering guidance, but more often than not, letting her lead. The partnership between them felt more solid than ever. They made an incredible team, balancing each other out perfectly. Gianna's sharp instincts and Ian's strategic mind created a force to be reckoned with. They were unstoppable. Their professional success was undeniable. The company's expansion into international markets was moving ahead smoothly, and they were securing deals faster than they had anticipated. Yet, even as they celebrated their triumphs, the dynamic between them was slowly evolving. One late evening, after another productive day, Gianna found herself standing in Ian's office, her eyes scanning the city skyline through the large windows. She had always found solace in the view, the lights stretching out in front of her like a sea of possibilities. Ian entered, closing the door softly behind him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt comfortable, not awkward as it had in the past. There was a certain peace in the way they existed together now, as though they were both finally in tune with each other. "Gianna," Ian said, his voice low, breaking the quiet. "We're doing well, aren't we?" Gianna turned to look at him, her heart racing at the simple question. She nodded slowly. "Yes, we are. But it's not just the business, Ian. It's the way we've worked together, the way we've built something real." Ian walked over to her, his eyes searching hers, his expression softened by something deeper than just admiration. "I know. It's more than just success in business," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's everything. What we've built together, what we are becoming. It's more than I ever expected." His words hit her like a wave, and for a moment, Gianna felt overwhelmed by the emotions she had been holding back. She had known for a long time that she was falling for him, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel so much more real. "You mean this?" Gianna asked, her voice thick with emotion. She stepped closer to him, the space between them closing with every heartbeat. Ian nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes," he replied simply, his gaze filled with an intensity that made Gianna's breath catch. "You and me. This, what we have, is real." His hand reached out, brushing her cheek gently, and Gianna closed her eyes at the soft touch. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear, and all that mattered was the man in front of her, the man who had become so much more than just her boss. "I've never believed in love like this," Gianna whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've always been so focused on everything else, on surviving, on proving myself. But now I don't know what to do with all of this." Ian's hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer until they were standing face to face. "You don't have to do anything, Gianna. Just let it happen. Let us happen." The words felt like a promise, a future they would build together. And Gianna felt herself leaning in, her heart pounding with anticipation. The moment their lips met, it was as if everything else faded away. There were no contracts, no deadlines, no expectations. There was only the soft pressure of his kiss and the warmth of his embrace. And in that kiss, Gianna felt everything, her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the future, all come together in one perfect, fleeting moment. When they finally pulled away, breathless and dazed, Gianna couldn't help but smile. "What now?" she asked, her voice teasing but filled with affection. Ian looked down at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Now we continue what we've started," he said. "We keep building this together." In the days that followed, their relationship evolved seamlessly. They continued to work together, growing the company, expanding into new markets, and making deals that would change the course of their future. But outside the boardroom, things were different. They found moments to be themselves, to let their guard down, and to simply enjoy each other's company. Whether it was sharing quiet dinners or walking through the city, the bond between them grew stronger every day. However, as much as they both wanted to focus on their relationship, the pressures of the company never truly left. The competition was fierce, and the business world was unforgiving. There were always new challenges to face, new risks to consider. Gianna had never been more aware of just how much was at stake. But with Ian by her side, she felt ready for anything. Together they had proven that they were a force to be reckoned with, not just in business but in their personal lives as well. The trust and respect they had for each other had become the foundation of everything they built. And it wasn't just about the money or the success. It was about the partnership they had formed, the love they had discovered, and the future they could now create together. One afternoon, as they sat in Ian's office, reviewing the latest financial reports, Gianna looked at him with a smile. "I think we've done it," she said, her voice filled with contentment. "We've built something incredible." Ian looked back at her, his expression softening. "Yes," he agreed. "We have. But this is just the beginning." Gianna's heart swelled with pride, and as she gazed into Ian's eyes, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The company was thriving, their relationship was flourishing, and the future was brighter than ever. They had found something neither of them had expected: success in both business and love. And as they walked into the future side by side, Gianna knew that with Ian, there was no limit to what they could achieve. Together, they were unstoppable. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey with Gianna and Ian. Their story is one of love, ambition, and the power of partnership, showing us that with trust and determination, anything is possible. We'd love to hear your thoughts on their journey. How do you feel about the challenges they faced and the love that blossomed along the way? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Your feedback means a lot to us. Until next time, take care. And we hope to bring you more inspiring stories soon.